So on this episode of Thrift Minis, I just want to show off some of the 40K and Necromunda Terrain that I've been building. This is not going to be a detailed build-along kind of thing, it's just a general overview to give you ideas. Now this first piece is inspired by the cardboard terrain from the original Necromunda set, and I just looked at pictures online and got a relative idea of how big it was, made myself a template. Most of this is foam board and pieces of cereal box. I used diamond dots to make the rivets, and then I just painted it with regular craft paint. And a lot of that rust effect is that terracotta color that I like. You can see the wires are just pieces of paper clip. I've got little pieces of chain and pieces of granny grating. The bulkhead parts are 3D printed Necromunda pieces from Thingiverse. And I don't own a 3D printer, but someone has given me some 3D printed parts which help me along. Some of my pieces are combinations of 3D parts and scratch built parts. That little part was a little container for pencil lead. And this is a piece that's made from a plastic container that held peanuts and pieces of an old stopwatch and an old wristwatch. You can see the back of a stopwatch there. You see the bottom of that? That was the lid of the container. But I thought it had an interesting shape and it looked like a water tank. I made the ladder out of some extra large matches. And you see those are just pieces of plastic card. Rivets were made from pieces of sprue that I stretched out over a cigarette lighter or over a candle. The little part at the top that looks like a wheel, that was a piece of jewelry, piece of costume jewelry, some little ship's wheel. But it makes it look like the lid of a tank. The palette was just pieces of popsicle stick. The little faucet there is a piece of sprue. The little wheel by the faucet is some little snap, like a little button. And then I just hand did some graffiti. Whenever I had a certain color out, I do a little bit of graffiti, and I can continue to do graffiti on pieces. So I've used a lot of these plastic railroad pieces from a dollar store. And the middle there I used granny grating and some cereal box and some diamond dots as rivets just to give it some more detail, and I just want to give you an idea of how big it is. The train was too small for Necromunda scale, but they make great walkways. And here's one that I'm still working on. So this lower part I have not painted, but I decided to put these bridge sections on supports. And I'm going to raise them up about 1/2 inch so that they're on a good level with all the rest of my terrain. And you see how I stuck these two pieces together. What I used was some old board for like a Scrabble or something. It was missing pieces. I just used the chipboard and a bunch of hot glue. So that's a halfway finished piece. And then these are some barricades. This was my first one, my proof of concept. That's corrugated paper, little offcuts from other projects. It's just on a piece of cereal box with a bunch of clay. And then all the cement is pieces of styrofoam. This one's on thick MDF board. And just busted up pieces of toys. See, I've got pieces of straw for pipe. The rebar is just pieces of wire. And just gravel for the busted cement and rocks and stuff. These just make good cover for 40K or Necromunda. You can put them on top of buildings or beside buildings to make it look like they're crumbling. These are just some 3D printed barrels that I got a bunch of. Because it's an MDF base, they're actually pretty heavy and they like to stay there. And here's a set of pipes that I just added some tile grout and some sand, and I dry brushed them with silver and made them look a bit rusty. And here's a walkway that I made. It was cereal box, and then I used a paint stir stick as support. And then these I-beam looking parts, these are actually part of a clothes hanger. And I saw it had this I-beam shape, and I thought, well, that would be great to give this some strength. Sometimes I use real pieces of rusted metal. As long as they're not sharp, I'll glue them to a piece once the piece is done. And here's a series of towers that I've made. I made about 3 towers like this. This was some old matchbox kind of tower toy. And what I did was I stuck foam board in each of these hexagon shapes, and I used foam board to make the lower floor there, and I supported it with some cardboard just to give it some strength. That's just hot glue and foam board. And then I painted it all rusty. I did the edges with cereal box, the rivets with diamond dots, and I worked in some of those Necromunda bulkhead pieces. Sometimes I improvised a bulkhead out of a piece of foam board and made some X shapes and triangle shapes out of cereal box, and it works all right. And for little details, I have like a little tin that used to hold mints and mini Legos, pieces of cereal box card, plastic straws, cardboard straws. The bottom of that is cereal box. The base is foam board. Covered it in some tile grout to give it some texture. And in this, I cut into that top of that foam board, made it look like there was a panel moved over and there were pipes and wires in there. Those were just straws. So you have a ladder up the side. Here's some cool scaffolds that I found at a dollar store. I think they're meant to display toy cars, and they come in 2 different sizes. But I just gave them a rusty finish, and they could double as ladders for some structure. They give it that verticality that Necromunda needs. And I'm just showing you some scale here. And of course those tire walls from that other video that I made. And then you can also use big tires. They could be big land crawler or tractor tires. I didn't even paint these. I just scuffed them up with sandpaper to make them look a little more worn out. And those are really easy and modular. Here's some big wheels that I got off of a Star Wars toy, and I thought they looked like some sort of industrial tanks. And these are great because they're stackable. They don't need a base. They don't take a lot of work. All I really did was prime and paint them. You could work them into a terrain piece and build them into something, but I might just leave them modular. So this piece was actually a 3D printed kit from Thingiverse, and then the tanks themselves are soda cans. You see I put a button down there as an old wheel. That little pipe is from some spray can for some aerosol, some plastic card, some granny grating, some 3D printed barrels. The base is a piece of foam board with paper on the bottom, painted with Mod Podge and black paint. Here's a piece I made. It's a Pringles tower, and this took a while to build. I used a Halloween skull to give it that kind of 40K gothic look. I used some sprue for the railings. I made the ladder out of pieces of bamboo skewer. I made a little clothesline. I wanted this to be a building that characters could go inside of. I was experimenting with that. So you can imagine characters could climb all the way up to the top. They could jump down onto that roof. See, it's sort of a shanty supported by old pipes. Maybe the area floods or something. When you go inside, there's a little oil drum wood stove, and then there's a piece of old furniture in there, and there's a window, and the window is some sort of like cheap Legos from the dollar store, and you just stick it back on. Here's some, I call them refrigerated containers. They were old MDF drawers from this little cabinet that I got from Goodwill by the pound for a few cents, but it only had 2 drawers. So I pulled them out, flipped them upside down, and I put a piece of foam board on them, and then I wrapped them with some cereal box card and some diamond dots for rivets. I used an old plastic game piece and some mesh on the back to make it look like some sort of air conditioning unit. And then those front pieces are some 3D printed doors that I just wedged in there and glued in there. These were really fast to make. They're bigger than a cargo container would be, but they're cool because they're stackable. They block line of sight. You could build them into a shanty town or something. This is a bridge of some plastic railroad toy. That X shape down there, that's all cereal box card. I just cut it out with an X-Acto knife over a piece of foam board. Then I used some mini Legos from the dollar store that they look like truss plates with bolts and rivets and stuff. And then this is some Star Wars cup toy, and I thought it looked like a really easy industrial smokestack. It looks kind of tau the more I look at it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I just painted it dark brown for now. Here is my first 40K building I built after I started getting back into it. This was used a template from Miscast. If you've ever seen his channel, go check it out. But I just followed that. I cut it out of foam board. I added a little bit of tile grout and sand to give the cement some structure. And I made a front entrance, and then I made a hole in the side of the building where somebody could make entry. This is probably my biggest building. This was another Miscast template. I think it's called the Fortress or something. So for this I used foam board and pieces of 5mm cork to give it some different details. And I built the whole building, and then I went in with a hot wire cutter and I just started slicing the back out, and using those rubble pieces I busted them up and put them back in there to show the building had collapsed. See, the back door there is blocked. I started adding bullet holes using a hot nail, and it still needs some work. I need to add some washes and some other stuff, but it's decent, it's playable. You see, I made that hole big enough that you could get your hand in there and put characters on the first floor. This just gives you an idea of how big the building is. See, and that top floor just sits on that little shelf I made out of foam board. It's pretty sturdy. You can put metal characters up there. Here's some more of those 3D printed barrels. I wanted trash in the streets and stuff, make it look like Escape from New York or something. Those rubber tires are real rubber. They're from some toy car, and I just super glued them to the barrels. These are just scattered terrain you can put on top of buildings or in the street. And this is a pile of ash. You imagine you're on some Forge world like Necromunda. There would be piles of slag and ash. I'll probably do a video on how I made these. These I wanted to get away from the rusty thing. They're just wooden beads with little wooden discs on top and little pieces of paper. I wanted them to look like plastic barrels and aluminum chemical barrels. All I did was glue them together, paint them silver, and I just hand painted some little yellow triangles. And when you stack them up in different ways, it looks pretty authentic. And they're a good height for cover. And this was just some toy crate, a little square bead, a 3D printed barrel, some scrap from another project, and it's just an easy piece of cover using stuff that I had sitting around. And of course those shacks from that other video that I did. You see, I made them so they have flat roofs so characters could climb up onto the roofs and take cover and get some sort of advantage. You see there's a little ladder on the back there. So that's it so far. You can see a lot of the stuff is work in progress, and as I get better, my pieces get better, and I'll pull stuff back out and I'll make improvements. Thanks to all my new subscribers. I'm going to be moving soon, but I'll post as soon as I can.